Wyoming Territory, May 1882. The wind carried the smell of ash as Quinton Vale stepped down from his horse and stared at what used to be his family's homestead. Nothing stood but the blackened bones of the cabin, the chimney still upright like a gravestone. He had not been back in 5 years. War took him first, if you could call the skirmishes down near the Rio Grande a war. Afterward, he worked cattle drives until he could afford the ride home. But nothing had prepared him for this. The barn was the only thing still standing, weather-beaten but spared from the fire. He led his sorrel gelding toward it, each step stirring up bitter dust. When he pushed the door open, the soft creak echoed into a silence that felt wrong, too still. Then he heard it, a breath, not his. Quinton reached for the pistol at his hip, but before he could draw, a voice cut through the shadows. "I ain't armed, just cold." He turned. A woman sat in the corner, wrapped in a threadbare quilt. Her eyes were sharp, watching him, but she did not move. Her hair was dark and tied back loosely, and her skirt was torn at the hem. She looked like she had not eaten in days. "You live here?" he asked, voice low. She shook her head. "Just needed shelter. Thought the place was empty." "It was," he said. "Used to be mine." She stood slowly, cautious, like she had learned not to trust too quick. "I can go." "No," he said too fast, caught off guard by how empty the land had felt before her voice. "No, you are fine." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Name's Mariah Foster. Quinton Vale." Something shifted in her eyes. Recognition maybe, or relief. He could not tell. "I did not mean to trespass," she said. "I came through 2 days ago. I was walking with my brother's horse. He died near Cheyenne. Fever took him. I buried him under the cottonwoods." Quinton took off his hat, held it against his chest. "I am sorry." She gave a small nod. "I had nowhere else to go. Just started walking. Found this place." He looked at her again. She was not from around here. He would have remembered her. She was thin, her face drawn from hunger, but her shoulders were square, and her chin didn't tremble. She had grit. "You eaten lately?" he asked. She hesitated. "I had half a loaf 2 nights ago. It is gone now." Quinton led his horse inside, then dug into his saddlebag. He handed her a wrapped piece of jerky and a tin of dried apples. She took them slowly, her fingers shaking as she unwrapped the food. "Thank you," she said, voice quiet. They did not talk much after that. She ate while he brushed down his horse. The silence between them was not heavy, just real. Honest. That night they shared the barn. He laid his bedroll near the door, kept his rifle beside him. She curled up near the hay. He could hear her breathing soft and slow, and it was the only sound in a world that had gone too quiet. In the morning he saddled up and rode into town. It was 10 miles to Rawlins, where he bought supplies: coffee, flour, beans, and a second blanket. The storekeeper asked if he was rebuilding. Quinton just said, "Maybe." When he got back, she was still there, sweeping the barn floor with a broken broom handle and a handful of sagebrush. "I figured I owed you something," she said. "You do not owe me anything." She looked at him. "You brought food. You let me stay. You needed help. So do you." He paused. She was right. They worked together over the next few days, clearing out the ashes. He found an old iron stove half buried in the rubble. She helped drag it out and clean it. They built a lean-to to cook under, used the barn for shelter. Mariah never asked about his past, and he did not press hers. But they talked while they worked. She told him she used to teach school in Missouri. He told her about growing up here, about his parents, both gone now, and his sister who died in a prairie fire the same year he left. "I thought maybe coming back would feel like home," he admitted one evening, watching the fire glow in the tin stove. "But it doesn't." "It will," she said, and her voice was so sure it made something in him steady again. One night, a storm rolled in. The wind howled, rain slamming against the barn roof, and the horses stamped nervously. Quinton lit the lantern and sat near her bedroll. She sat up, her quilt pulled tight around her. "I hate storms," she said. "Always have?" He nodded. "Me too." She looked at him, her face soft in the lantern glow. "Do you ever wonder if life just burned down without you noticing?" Quinton met her eyes. "Every day." She reached out, fingers brushing his knuckles. "Then maybe we build something new. Together." He did not speak, just turned his hand over and held hers. It was not a promise. Not yet. But it was something. In the morning, the storm was gone. The sky was clean and wide, and the air smelled like wet earth. They built a table from salvaged boards. He carved her name into one corner. She laughed when she saw it, and for the first time, he saw her smile full and bright. That night, she leaned against his shoulder while they watched the fire. He did not move away. He did not want to. And for the first time in years, Quinton Vale felt something settle in his chest. Hope. The mornings came cold that high up even in late spring. Quinton rose before the sun and stepped outside the barn, the grass wet beneath his boots, the air sharp with pine and sage. He listened not for danger, just for the quiet, and then went to gather kindling from the windbreak of twisted juniper behind the barn. By the time he returned, Mariah had stirred. She sat near the stove, unwinding a length of thread from a wooden spool, her hands deft and practiced. She had found a bundle of worn muslin in one of the crates he'd brought back from Rawlins and was stitching narrow seams with a bone needle. "What's that for?" he asked, crouching to feed the stove. "Curtains," she said. "For the lean-to. Sun's been waking me earlier than I like." He glanced toward the lean-to. "Didn't know you sewed." She lifted an eyebrow. "Didn't know you slept that hard." He chuckled and shook his head. "Fair enough." They shared cornbread warmed in the skillet and coffee boiled thick and bitter. She didn't take sugar, and he had none to offer anyhow. After breakfast, she asked for a hammer, and they spent an hour reinforcing the lean-to slats with scraps from the ruined porch. She worked beside him in silence, sleeves rolled, hair braided tight against the wind. When the last board was nailed, she stepped back, brushing sawdust from her skirt. "I was thinking," she said, glancing at the pasture. "You've got good grass. If you had a few cows, you could start small. Trade at the depot, maybe?" He leaned against the post, arms crossed. "You think I should start ranching again?" "I think you know how," she said. "And I think a place needs something alive on it. Otherwise it just stays empty." He studied her, the way she looked out over the land like she could see 10 years down the line. "You planning to stay long enough to see that through?" She didn't answer right away. "I haven't decided yet. But I'm not walking anymore. That's something." That afternoon, he saddled up and rode northwest, following the creek toward a neighbor's spread. The Crawfords had run Herefords for near 2 decades. He hadn't spoken to them since before he left, but folks out here didn't hold grudges long if you came honest. He returned at dusk with 2 calves on a lead rope and a sack of oats tied behind the saddle. She met him at the gate, eyebrows raised. "You traded something?" "They owed my father a favor," he said. "I figured I'd collect." She nodded, and the corner of her mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close. "I'll start soaking beans. You'll want supper after that ride." He brushed the horses down while she cooked. When he came inside, the smell of cumin and onion filled the barn. She'd found a tin of dried chilies in the bottom of one of the boxes and made a stew that warmed him down to bone. That night, they sat on the low bench outside the barn. The stars were close and sharp, the Milky Way faint as chalk dust overhead. He passed her the tin cup half full of whiskey he'd brought back from town. She took a careful sip. "I used to think the sky was always this big," she said. "Then I moved to St. Louis. Couldn't see anything but smoke." "You from the city?" "No. But I thought I wanted it. Turned out it didn't want me." He waited, but she didn't go on. After a while, she asked, "Why'd you stay away so long?" He turned the cup in his hands, the whiskey catching the starlight. "Didn't have the right reason to come back. Until now." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "And now?" He set the cup down between them. "Now I've got more than one." She didn't say anything, not with words. But she laid her hand over his and left it there. His fingers curled over hers, slow and steady. No one moved to break the quiet. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods. The calves shuffled in the pen, and something between them settled like a gate swinging closed behind them, quiet and sure. The sound of an axe splitting wood echoed through the valley, sharp and rhythmic. Mariah stood near the creek with her skirts pinned up, scrubbing one of the flour sacks into a smooth stone. She glanced toward the rise where Quinton worked, his sleeves rolled past the elbow, shoulders moving with quiet force. The pile of cut logs beside him had grown taller than the stump he split them on. She wrung out the sack and spread it on a patch of sun-warmed rock. The wind stirred her damp sleeves as she straightened. Her hands ached from the cold water, but the ache was clean, purposeful. She didn't miss the stillness of before, the kind that came only when you had nowhere to be and no one waiting on you. Quinton tossed the last piece onto the pile and walked down toward her, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "You always work like that?" she asked. "Only when I need thinking done. Any luck with it?" He crouched beside the stream and dipped his hands in. "Some. Thought maybe it's time to clear the old garden plot. Soil's likely still decent under the ash." She studied him. "You planning on planting this year?" "I was thinking you might want to. You said something about squash, didn't you?" "I said I knew how to grow it. Not that I liked it." He smiled. "Then we'll trade it off for something better." They walked back toward the barn together, a quiet rhythm in their steps. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of distant pine and turned earth. She paused, glancing toward the far edge of the field. "There's something buried out there," she said. He followed her gaze. "You mean what's left of the root cellar?" "No, not that. A grave." Quinton's jaw tightened. "You saw it. Just the marker. Cedar branch stuck in the ground, stripped clean." He nodded slowly. "That was my sister's." Mariah didn't speak. She waited. "She was 10, he said. Got caught between the house and the barn when the fire came. Tried to get the dog out of the stall." Her eyes didn't leave his face. "Was she the last one left when you rode out?" "She was the last one I had left of blood. I buried her that night. Never touched the land again after that." "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice had no softness to it, only weight and truth. He ran a hand down his face and exhaled through his nose. "I didn't think I could come back. Not without her ghost rising up in every corner. But you did. I didn't expect anyone to be here." Mariah bent down and picked a stone from the path. "Neither did I. But I think your sister would have liked knowing someone was still putting things right." He looked at her, then really looked. The wind tugged a strand of hair loose from her braid, and she didn't bother to fix it. "You're not running anymore," he said. She shook her head. "There's nothing out there to run to. I had a man once. That life ended when he decided I wasn't worth the trouble of hard seasons." Quinton's brow furrowed. "He hurt you?" "No, not with hands. Just with walking away when the money dried up. He wanted a woman who could be grateful without needing anything." "You're not like that." "No, I'm not." They stood there a while longer, the sun sinking behind the hill. He reached out and brushed the dirt from her sleeve, fingers light and sure. "I've got enough timber now," he said. "Could start framing a cabin." She narrowed her eyes. "You building it for yourself?" He didn't look away. "I'm building it for us both. If you'll stay." Mariah didn't answer, but her hand found his and she laced their fingers together with quiet certainty. Later that evening, she brought out a tin box she'd pulled from beneath the wagon tarp. Inside were seeds wrapped in folded paper, labeled in pencil. "Saved them from Missouri," she said. "Didn't know why I kept them. Thought maybe I'd plant them somewhere, someday." He turned one of the little packets over in his hand. "Larkspur. My mother's favorite. We'll plant them near the porch," he said. "There's no porch yet." "There will be." She looked up at him and something behind her eyes softened. "Then I guess I'll have to build it with you." They didn't speak much after that. Just sat beneath the slow-moving sky, her shoulder pressed to his, the seed box between them. The land around them hadn't changed. Still quiet. Still scarred. But for the first time in years, Quinton didn't feel like it had the last word. By early June, the grass stood knee-high in the lower field, thick with wild rye and clover. Mariah knelt beside the new garden bed, pressing her thumb into the soil to check for dampness beneath the surface. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge, but sweat already gathered at the back of her neck. She wiped it with her sleeve, then reached for the hemp sack beside her, pulling out 2 handfuls of pole bean seeds. Across the yard, Quinton worked alone with a draw knife, stripping bark from the cabin's ridge beam. The frame had gone up clean, each joint tight and true, the corners braced with timber he'd salvaged from the collapsed smokehouse. When she glanced up, he was squinting toward the line of trees beyond the pasture. His hand paused mid-motion. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "You see something?" He kept his eyes on the trees. Wagon tracks, fresh ones, coming in from the west. Her fingers tightened around the seed sack. "You expecting someone?" "No, they met at the barn," both quiet as the creak of wheels grew louder. A single mule-drawn cart rounded the bend, the driver a lean man in a canvas coat, a wide-brimmed hat shading a narrow face. He reined in at the gate, lifting a hand in greeting. "Y'all Vale," he called. Quinton stepped forward. "That's me. Name's Cyrus Bell. I'm with the rail company out of Medicine Bow. They sent me to ask about the land, heard it was abandoned." "It's not." Cyrus nodded slowly. "Didn't look like it from a distance. But there's been talk of laying a spur line through this valley. They asked me to mark possible sites." Mariah crossed her arms. "This land's not for sale." He glanced at her, then back to Quinton. "Fair enough. But the company's got deep pockets. You sure you want to rebuild when you could start fresh somewhere else?" Quinton didn't move. "I buried kin here. I'm not walking away." Cyrus scratched the back of his neck. "Well, I'll mark it off as occupied. Can't make promises about what'll happen if the company pushes through, but I'll pass the word." He turned the mule and wheeled the cart back the way he'd come, dust curling off his wheels. Mariah didn't speak until the sound disappeared behind the hill. "They'll be back," she said. "I know," Quinton answered. She looked toward the far edge of the pasture, where the first sun touched the tops of the cottonwoods. "Then we'll have to make this place strong enough they can't take it." Later that day, she brought out the ledger book she'd carried since Missouri, its pages filled with small, slanted writing. "This was my mother's," she said, setting it on the table Quinton had built. She kept accounts for everything: seed, trade, milk yield, weather. "I picked it up after she passed." He flipped through the pages slowly. "You've been keeping records this whole time?" She nodded. "It helps me see what's worth holding on to." He turned back to the first page. "You think this place belongs in here?" "I wouldn't have brought it out if I didn't." Just before dusk, Quinton rode out to check the upper fence line. Mariah stayed behind, patching the hem of her only good dress with thread dyed from pokeberry. She didn't hear his return, not at first. But when he stepped into the barn, something in his expression stopped her hand. "What is it?" He set a bundle on the table. "Found this tucked near the fence." Wrapped in oilcloth. She opened it carefully. Inside lay an old photograph: 2 men in Union blue, arms slung over each other's shoulders, faces worn and proud. "That's my brother," she whispered, touching the edge of the picture. "And the man beside him. That's Eli. He was the one who left me." Quinton stood beside her, silent. "I didn't know they'd surfed together. You want me to burn it?" She stared at the picture a long while, then folded the cloth back over it. "No. He left." "But I'm still standing." That night, they sat on the unfinished porch, the floorboards cool beneath their feet. The moon hung low and yellow over the ridge, and the only sound was the soft rustle of night birds in the brush. Quinton leaned back against the post. "You ever think about what it'd be like if none of this had burned? If everything had stayed the same?" She ran her fingers along a knot in the wood. "Sometimes, but I think maybe we'd never have met." He turned toward her. "You regret it?" "No," she said. "I don't." He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. Their fingers laced, not in question, but in answer. The porch creaked gently under them, the night warm and full, and for the first time neither of them looked back. The cabin walls stood chest-high by late July, each beam cut and pegged with care. The roof timbers lay stacked nearby, waiting on a clear stretch of days. Quinton worked with a steady rhythm, shirt sticking to his back, his hat pulled low to keep the sun from his eyes. Mariah passed water up to him in a tin pail, her palms red from hauling stone to line the root cellar. "You've got a hitch in your swing," she said, watching him set the mallet against a corner brace. "Your left shoulder's favoring something." He looked down from the beam. "Took a fall years ago. Broke it clean through. It healed wrong. You ever get it set again?" "No time. Cattle drive didn't wait." She reached for the brace and pressed her thumb beneath it to check the fit. "You should let me wrap it when the work's done. You'll feel it more when the cold comes." He tilted his head. "You always this bossy?" "Only when I know I'm right." They moved around each other with ease, now no need for explanations or second-guessing. Her hands knew the shape of his gait, the way he shifted weight before lifting. He read the strain in her brow before she asked for rest. There was comfort in that kind of knowing, something that didn't need to be spoken aloud to carry weight. That evening, Mariah took the ledger and sat on the porch sill while Quinton cleaned the tools. She flipped to a new page and began to write, her pen catching in a groove where the boards hadn't been sanded yet. "You're recording the build?" he asked, glancing up. "Not just that. I've been tracking what we've planted, how many eggs the hens are laying, and the number of passing wagons." He leaned against the doorframe. "You thinking of selling off the extra?" "I was thinking of preparing. If that company sends someone again, I want proof this land's worked and lived on." He nodded, thoughtful. "We'll need more than that if they press a claim. We'll need a marriage license," she said, her eyes not leaving the page. He didn't answer right away. "Then, is that your way of asking?" "It's my way of saying I'm not watching another thing I care about get taken away on someone else's terms." He crossed the porch and knelt beside her, setting a hand lightly on her knee. "You're sure?" She met his eyes. "I've never been more." They rode into Rollins 3 mornings later. Quinton wore his cleanest shirt and the coat he'd kept packed away since Texas. Mariah's dress was mended at the hem and brushed smooth, her hair pinned up with the carved bone comb she rarely brought out. The clerk at the courthouse didn't ask many questions, just stamped the paper and slid it across the desk with a quiet congratulations. They were married under the cottonwoods that evening. No preacher, no ring. Just the wind moving through the branches and the sound of the stream nearby. Quinton took her hands and said what he meant plainly without flourish. "You're the first place I've come back to where I wanted to stay." Mariah touched his jaw, her fingers steady. "And you're the first man who's ever seen the whole of me and didn't look away." He kissed her then, slow and sure. No crowd, no witness but the land that had shaped them both. By September, the cabin had a roof. The porch bore a swing made from leather and rawhide, and the garden held more than squash corn, too, and rows of late summer beets. The calves had grown strong, and Quinton was breaking ground for a second pen. One morning, Mariah stood at the threshold of their home, watching the mist rise from the pasture. She pressed a hand over her belly, still flat but carrying the quiet knowledge of something new. He came up behind her, arms circling her waist. "You feel all right?" She smiled. "Just thinking. This land was ash when I found it. And now look." He placed his hand over hers. "It's ours now. All of it." That winter, they sealed the windows with oilcloth and lined the walls with wool blankets Mariah had traded for in town. Snow came heavy, but the cabin held. Quinton's shoulder ached some nights, but she kept a poultice at the ready, and he didn't complain. They read by lantern light, her voice carrying gently through the room as she shared passages from her mother's ledger recipes. Planting notes, a line about the first storm her parents had weathered together. "You think they were happy?" he asked once. She stayed. "That's enough to tell me." And so did Mariah. Through the thaw and the next planting. Through a summer birth that left Quinton stunned at the strength in her and a baby girl with her mother's dark hair and her father's steady eyes. They named her Ruth after the sister who'd once braved fire for a dog she wouldn't leave behind. Years passed. The rail line veered east after a landholder refused to sell. The company sent no more men. The homestead stayed quiet but full. Friends came through, stayed for supper, sometimes longer. Mariah taught local children their letters at the edge of the porch while Ruth played in the garden rows. Quinton built a second room onto the cabin, then a smokehouse, then a bench beneath the cottonwoods where they'd first stood together. They aged with the land, weathered, yes, but rooted deep. And every evening, when the light stretched long across the fields, he'd take her hand and walk the property line, their fingers laced like it was still the first time. Because for them it always was.